For a fun and informative podcast all about training working dogs, look no further than the LWDG Pod Dog. This weekly show is hosted by me, Joanne Perrott, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group, and I chat to experienced trainers and experts in the field who will give you helpful tips and advice. Whether you're just getting started or you've been working dogs for years, this podcast will have something for you. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee and tune in to LWDG Pod Dog, and let us help you build a better bond with your best friend. Hello and welcome to another episode of LWDG Pod Dog. This week I'm joined by the amazing Claire Denyer. Claire, how are we today?
I'm very well, thank you, Jo. How are you?
I'm very excited to talk to you about a conversation that we tend to have quite a lot within the group, which is what to expect when your puppy turns into a teenager. Now, we have the conversations all the time that we had this really, really adorable puppy that was so good. And then as it grew up a little bit and got a little bit older, it turned into this like mad teenager. And they go through this really difficult period, don't they?
They do, yeah. It can be a real challenge for a lot of owners. And that phase really differs from dog to dog, but it's being prepared that it can happen to any dog from around 5 months of age, which surprises a lot of people when they first realise that, because at 5 months of age, most young dogs still look very much like a tiny little puppy, but they start behaving in different ways. They're learning different things. With some dogs, you might not notice it till a bit later, but it can happen any time from 5 months of age.
So, what you just said there, I suppose to a lot of us, we expect a human to go through a teenage phase, but a lot of owners are quite shocked that their dog is going through this sort of challenging time where they are really testing their boundaries for us, aren't they? So, what are the changes that will take place in a dog's body when they turn into a teenager?
Yeah. So as I said, adolescence officially starts from 5 months of age, but varying from dog to dog and breed to breed, you're going to notice different things at different times. But from that time until adulthood, the things that are going on for that dog, which can interrupt training, change behaviours, are things like teething. So we have to be very mindful that until a young dog is around 7 months of age, they're still going through a teething process. Obviously, physically, they're still growing. Now, obviously, the smaller breeds will reach their full height quicker and at a younger age than the bigger breeds. The bigger the breed, the longer that growing phase takes. But it's not just the height, it's also developing muscle, broadening out. So there's a lot of growth going on. So, of course, that can cause the dog to maybe go through growth spurts. You know, some young dogs have almost like growing pains. Then you've also got hormones developing as well. So a lot of young dogs, when them hormones are kicking in, will seemingly become more distracted by the world around them, and by scent and by other dogs and people, because all of this physical stuff is going on. And they do grow incredibly quickly. I mean, when I look at my Labradors, the changes in them physically from 8 weeks of age to 18 months of age, I mean, that's crazy. They just grow so quickly and so much is going on for the dog during that time.
I remember with Dad's lab pups, you know, you'd see this, he liked to keep the boys and they tended to be quite gangly and quite all over the place, and then they would hit this phase where they would literally, you would almost see their skulls broaden. They would go from this little gangly thing to this quite strong, quite wide, quite physically not overpowering, but you could tell at that point they were a man, not a pup, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. However, they mature much slower than they grow physically. So it's really remembering that the mental maturity in a lot of dogs and a lot of breeds actually takes a lot longer than the growing. So you have all this stuff going on. So you've got this like 5-month-old puppy that still looks like this little baby, is very immature and going through all this stuff. And then you've also got your, say, a year-old, an 18-month-old Labrador, let's say, for instance, who, let's just say, you know, they look like they're grown and they look quite adult, but mentally, a lot of them are still very immature.
Yeah, because isn't it correct that, like, for example, a Labrador is 2 years until they're fully mature, isn't it?
It really varies from dog to dog. Yes, I would say the average Labrador matures mentally between 2 to 3 years of age. But just in my three, I've seen a huge variance in that. So Indy, who's now 10 years old, she was very serious, very young. She was always a very serious puppy, which made her seemingly more mature. Rose, who is now 3, I have to say it's only in the last 6 months that I feel like she's developed what I would call a sensible head. You know, in terms of training, she had it all, but she didn't yet have the maturity to kind of like not need a lot of guidance from me. And Dude, bless his heart, the middle one, who's 8 years of age, I can honestly say he must have been 3 to 4 years old before I felt like he had a mature head on him. But it doesn't mean they're not able to learn and they're not able to train effectively. But the mental maturity is what tends to give you more reliability.
And if you take that information and then you listen to our previous podcast on the working dog age race, you can, see even further this race to get them trained as fast as possible. It really doesn't align to how they are maturing, does it?
No, it really doesn't. And that's a real challenge, because what I often see in adolescence, and I see this with clients' dogs all the time, is you might get puppies that come and do our puppy foundation classes, and then they might start beginner gun dog, which we don't take young dogs into beginner gun dog until they're at least 5 to 6 months of age, ideally 6 or older, because we have to bear in mind they're still going through teething and all things like that, and that can affect the gun dog training. It can affect them wanting to retrieve, how that feels for them when they're retrieving. But everybody's in quite a race with these young dogs, and they start off really well, and a lot of the time the dogs that start really well, when they hit adolescence and they're now being distracted by their hormones kicking in and by other things in the environment, it feels like the training's going wrong. But it isn't that the training's going wrong, it's just that the dog has got all this other stuff going on in its body and in its head. And so we can't rush through the training. So you have to work with every dog so individually and at a pace that is working for that dog with that owner. So we always sort of say to people, look, yes, you're all roughly the same level, but all of your dogs will mature at different rates, will go through different things at different stages. So don't compare your dog to another dog, and don't compare where you are with your training to the next person, because your journey will be very individual.
So we've just started to touch upon it there, but what are the challenges that come with this period of development that we can expect to see as owners with regards to things like training?
There's so many challenges. So many. One of the things I will touch on, because there is something that is often talked about in the dog training world, which is the dog's fear phases. So there's a lot of controversy amongst some people about these fear phases. But what I will say is that it does seem that between 6 months and 14 months of age, a lot of young dogs seem to go through what we call a second fear phase, which is where they suddenly become worried, fearful, unsure of things that maybe in the past they've been absolutely fine with. So that can manifest itself in various ways. It could be that they suddenly see somebody with an umbrella and start barking. It could be they suddenly seem more sensitive to noise. But it's really important, if your dog goes through a second fear phase, be patient and act in a relaxed, matter-of-fact way about these things. Don't force your dog to actually face something that they're genuinely fearful of. You don't want to be pushing the dog towards something that they're really fearful of, that they're genuinely afraid of. But equally, you don't want to make a really big deal of the situation. So you just need to kind of treat the dog almost as you did as a puppy when you were socializing it and working with it through getting it used to different things. Then it's kind of a very similar process. Behaviorally wise, you might find that your dog gets more distracted than it did before when you're training. So you might find that whereas your keen little retriever that used to run out, pick a retrieve and come back at the speed of light, they might be starting to think about, well, what else is on offer for me? How much do I value that dummy? Maybe I'll go and have a pee over there instead. Maybe I'll run up to that dog instead and see what they want to come and play with me, because that looks like fun. You might find that your dog suddenly becomes way more interested in people and dogs than it's ever been before. You might find that some of the steadiness that you maybe have been putting in, your dog starts to get overexcited and is like, oh, this is amazing. And you might lose some of your steadiness that you've been working so hard on. Equally, your dog might suddenly think that you're formalizing things too quickly and they're young and just want to have fun, might go off the boil. So there's loads of things during adolescence that can occur in the training because the dog has got other things going on. It's got the growth, it's got the hormones, and it's also developing a little bit more independence, which can be a challenge in itself.
If you think about it, you see so many of our members write about the fact that this frustration that they are feeling because the dog feels quite disengaged from them. But if we start thinking about all these sort of hormone things going on, it's probably, we should be shocked if they're not disengaged from us, shouldn't we, at this point? Although we're encouraging them to still be working with us, we should be expecting, as Sam would say, expect the unexpected, but we should expect them to lose their focus and find other things more interesting than us a little bit.
Yeah, I think for most dogs at some point in their training during adolescence, you're going to go through it. It's very few dogs don't hit any kind of adolescent phase where they seem more distracted or they seem more fearful or they seem a bit less interested in training and more interested in other things. But when that happens between sort of 5 months and up to adulthood, varies greatly between dog to dog. So you might think you've got away with it. I remember at 7 months of age, I hadn't noticed anything with Indy. And literally overnight, the next day, her recall just was gone, like literally gone. And up until that day, she had recalled 100% regardless of what was going on around her. And then at 7 months of age, she just went, nah, I think I might decide I want to do something else instead. And I remember phoning John because he was out with her that first time it happened and he'd been gone a really long time. And I phoned him and said, where are you? You've been gone ages. You should be back by now. And he said, I will be back in a minute, but without the dog at this rate. And I said, why? And he said, the blooming dog, he said, she is 5 foot away from me, but she will not come any closer. And she was literally bouncing. And for her, that was a game. She'd never done it before, but she was suddenly like, let's just see what happens if I do this. So she had to go back on a long line for a couple of months while we taught her that it's not negotiable, sweetheart. This recall is a very important part of your training.
When you're talking about things like that, and we've talked about a little bit about the frustration and handling the challenges, what is the way to go forward with it for as an owner? Because part of us could think, okay, oh well, it's to be expected, I will chill out, I'll take all the pressure off and I won't really care about this. But then part of us might be thinking, well, actually there's going to be a whole amount of time where this dog doesn't get the training it should. So where's the balance? What should we do if things get difficult with our dog?
That's a really interesting point, Joe, and it's something that owners need to be educated on for sure. You see on forums a lot conversations where people say the dog will grow out of it about things that are going on during adolescence. Now, dogs will do what we allow them to do. That's the bottom line of it. And so if we don't teach that young dog that actually that's not appropriate, your dog may not grow out of it because they don't know any different. They don't know any better. You've not told them that's not okay. So let's just say with Indy, with that recall problem, let's just say we hadn't put a long line on her that very next day and gone, this can't happen again. I'm talking, it took John like 40 minutes to get her in the end. So we put the long line on because what we needed to do was teach her that it's not negotiable. You have to recall. If we had chosen not to do that, what would have happened? She could have repeated that behaviour day after day, walk after walk, and that then becomes for her the norm and the habit. And the likelihood of her growing out of that game pretty much isn't there. So we do have to look at a behaviour, and if the dog is exhibiting a behaviour that isn't one that we want them to continue in their life, we have to change something or do something about it to ensure that that doesn't become what the dog believes is the norm.
So this is a little bit like same as humans when you're going through adolescence. If you've got a teenager who's being a little bit bolshy, you're going to take into account the fact that they've got hormones, but you're still going to say the rules are the rules, kiddo.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can't allow the dog to just decide, that's how they're going to behave for the next 6 months. You leave that 6 months, you've got an ingrained behavior that becomes much more difficult to fix. So that goes for everything that happens in adolescence. The common things is recall. Dog starts pulling and lunging towards other dogs or people, jumping up, all these behaviors. If we don't educate the dog that that's not okay when they're going through adolescence, that's what you're going to get in your adult dog. It becomes much, much harder to then rectify or modify those behaviors when you've got an adult dog that's been performing those behaviors for a long time.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday with a guy called John Asraf who talks about the human brain, but talks about habit forming, and he was saying about if you think of a field full of grass, if you walk once across that grass, you're not really going to get a path. The grass will come back up. You'll not see where the person's been. But if you continuously walk the same path over and over and over, after a certain while, there is no grass there. It's bare, and that is basically how habits are formed. That way of ingraining it so deep into our minds.
Yeah.
That it's there. And what he talks about, which I found fascinating yesterday, was once a habit is formed, you can change a habit, but the old habit doesn't go away. So you can change this new habit, but it's very, very easy for us to go back to the old habit. And I can see what you're saying here with a teenage dog. We're allowing them to get away with it and saying, no, it's okay, it's a teenager. We're allowing them to really, really ingrain that habit and making ourselves a lifelong problem, really, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely that. That's exactly it.
So what are your top tips, Claire, for helping your dog to adjust to being a teenager, to push forward their training, but to allow them to work through this period in their life?
Yeah. Okay. So my tips that I would give generally to all owners on dealing with adolescence in a dog: be consistent in the messages that you are giving your dog. So what I mean by that is, don't one day allow them to do a behaviour, the next day tell them they can't do the behaviour, and then the day after that allow them to do the behaviour again. You need to be really consistent in the messages that you're giving your little adolescent dog so that they understand what is and isn't acceptable. It's really unfair on the dog if you're not consistent, because it makes it much harder for them to learn and understand. Be clear and concise in what you're doing as well. So make sure that you are being it's similar to consistency, but make sure you're being very clear that you're setting those rules and boundaries, that you play with the dog, that you enjoy the dog, but you also have those clear and concise rules and boundaries about what is and isn't acceptable. You need to continue to proof your training. So when the dog's going through adolescence, taking the foundations that are really strong and proofing them in different environments, under different circumstances, and in different areas. So you're proofing that training and getting the young dog, to understand that the behaviours that you ask for in the garden, that they can do so well on the training field, that they apply outside of those areas as well. Be prepared to go back to basics if your dog is really struggling. Be prepared to take a step back in your training, and then rebuild from there. There's no point letting something consistently go wrong. So for me, if a dog makes a mistake twice, I will then change something the third time, help the dog get it right, whether that be shortening the distance, reducing the distractions, whatever it is. I will change something so that the dog isn't repeating that behavior again and again. And as we were saying about just now, learning the unwanted behaviors and then becoming ingrained. So if something's gone wrong twice, on the third time, change something and set the dog up for success. Make sure that you continue during adolescence to build on that recall that you've worked so hard on. Don't let that slip, because during adolescence, that's the most common thing that starts to slip is recall. And teach your dog, how to have good manners, and how to behave generally. They would be my top tips.
Claire got really, really excited then. I thought she's going to somehow end up giving me this 5 C's, because you're consistent in the message, precise with our requests, clear in our actions, continue to prove training. I was like, she's making up a 5 C's. And then we got be prepared to take a step back.
Okay, maybe I need to think of a sentence that starts with C for that one.
Yeah, they are amazing tips. So we're either going to end up with 4 C's from Claire or 5 C's from Claire. We'll see if we can work that out and add it into the show notes. If people are having issues with adolescence, if you're having issues with your recall, please make sure to go and check out the Hot Mess Handler. I've been told that I don't actually tell people about it enough, so I'm going to tell people more about it. We do have a foundational training course. It covers 9 foundational areas that if you listen, if you learn, if you practice, you will have a very, very solid foundational dog that you can then grow upon, do more with, improve. So if you want to find out more about that, just go along to www.ladiesworkingdoggroup.com/hotmesshandler. Thank you very much for this today, Claire. I'm sure people are going to be absolutely loving this and thinking, I definitely need to think about this a little more if I've got a new pup. If you've got a dog that's been through adolescence and you're thinking a little bit oh, I didn't do those 4 C's, I didn't do those things, what should they do?
Definitely seek help from somebody. Seek help from a trainer, can help you. It's all very well trying to muddle through it yourself, but if your dog's already got ingrained behaviours that need to be changed, it can be very hard to see through the mist of that yourself and get very frustrated. So absolutely seek a trainer to help you.
I absolutely agree. As much, as founder of the LWDG, I love everything we do. I learn from our monthly masterclasses, I learn from our forums, I learn from our live coaching, all that stuff. I do find spending time with a trainer incredibly valuable, because like you said, they can see things in your relationship with your dog that you may not be able to see. It helps you see the wood through the trees, for want of a better word. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Claire, for another amazing podcast. We hope you've all enjoyed. Please send us your feedback. With each podcast, there's also a blog in the free content on our website. So go along, have a little look at that, pop your comments in there, and Claire will be able to see them. Have a lovely week, and we shall speak to you all next week. Thank you for listening to LWDG Pod Dog with me, Jo Parrott. Now, we all know training a dog takes time, energy and patience, but our lives can be really, really busy. Don't worry, the LWDG has got you covered. Join us for our free planning workshop where we'll show you how to use short 10-minute training sessions each day to fast forward your dog's education. Our experts have years of experience in training dogs and will help you get started on the right foot. Register now and start making progress with your furry friend today. Go to our Facebook page, the Ladies Working Dog Group, and click on the pinned post, or visit www.thelwdg.com.